Guys, my name is Shihao. I work on the Flutter team in Google in the Bay Area, California. But then right now, I'm currently working out of Taiwan. Um, I've been on the Flutter team for about 2 years now. And originally, my talk was going to be about the story of a Flutter feature. But then I also gave that talk in two separate Flutter Engage extended sessions. So I wanted to do something a little bit different for the Malaysia version because, the previous talk's already available online and I don't want to be repeating myself. But then that also meant that I started on this, I started writing this talk this morning. So there might be some rough edges. I'm going to do a live coding demo. So, things might go wrong, but, hey, we're going to learn about this together, learn about this topic together. And, just bear it with me. So today, my plan was to basically talk a little bit about localizing a Flutter application because, living in a country like Malaysia, like there's like a very interesting situation, right, where we have to localize a Flutter application not only to English, but also to maybe like Malay or Mandarin, or you start from Malay and then you have to localize to English or Mandarin, or like, if you're international, you have to do it for a whole bunch of other countries, like, in like Thailand or Vietnam, and then you'll have to localize your app. So I thought this was like an interesting topic for, this specific session. Right. As I mentioned before, brace yourself. It's going to be a rough demo. We'll see how it goes. I hope to get this done in about maybe 15 to 20 minutes, but we'll see how it goes. So a brief primer for those who don't really know what localization is. It's just basically, like I mentioned before, like supporting multiple locales. So like, for example, like English, Malay, Chinese, but sometimes you have to differentiate for Chinese as well, like traditional versus simplified Chinese. And then for Malay, like Bahasa, you have Bahasa Melayu, but you also have Bahasa Indonesia. So you have to like take those into account. And it's also more than just translation. You have to think about, when you lay out your application, is it left to right? Is it right to left? As like, for example, like Arabic is a right to left language. Japanese is also a right to left scripted language. So you have to take those ideas into consideration when designing your application as well. In Flutter, particularly, we use something called ISO 6391. And basically, this is just an attempt to standardize and provide like names and nomenclature to specific locales. So for example, the EN description, the two-letter EN abbreviation is for English, but it can be EN_UK or EN_US for like more specific, like, American or like British English. And MS is Bahasa Malaysia, and then I think IN or ID is Bahasa Indonesia. Okay. As I mentioned before, like localization can be pretty complex, right? Like for example, region, like the US and the UK, the English that's spoken there and the English that's written there is very different. I mean, can be very different. Like, for example, even with spelling, like flavor, FLAVOR versus VOUR. And, I also learned this when I was studying in the US that the Americans don't say car park. They get confused when you say car park. They say parking lot. It's like little things like that. And with the written script itself, right? Like I mentioned, traditional Chinese, it's used in like regions like Hong Kong and Taiwan, but it's not used in like the mainland China and in Malaysia. And then, like I mentioned, script and region, like, you might use traditional Chinese for Taiwan and Hong Kong, but then the way you write things in both countries, both regions are very different. Getting translations right. So this is another important piece. Like when you get translations done for an application, you want to think about, who's your translator, right? Like you might just get your friend to translate for your application, or you might have like a vendor that's a translation team for your application, just depending on the scale of what you're doing for your Flutter app. So context is key. Like, for example, like this is something my coworker mentioned to me before, that they wrote in their translation, oh, like, there's something in the menu bar that you have to tap, but then the translation team came back with the word food menu in Chinese instead of menu bar. So, it's like little things like that you might not think about, but then might actually affect your production application, right? Imagine in your app, instead of saying menu bar, you said, oh, look at this food menu. That's going to be a really awkward situation for, your Chinese readers. And then another thing you have to think about is, can your translator understand technical terms, right? Like when I say tooltip, will like the typical, like will someone who doesn't understand tech know what a tooltip is? Will they understand what a long press means? Like when I say something, with machine learning or neural networks or like cryptocurrency or blockchain, will they understand what I'm saying? So, providing them some context for like what those terms might mean, or like, educating your translators about what you're trying to say to your audience. Another thing that you might have to think about is, interpolating variables into your translations, right? I'll go into this a little bit more in the coding demo later, but basically when you say, for example, you have to tap this button X times, like where does that X show up? You have to like, for different languages, like that variable shows up in different parts of your string. So you have to really think about that. Okay. So localizing a Flutter application. So this is basically the tool I'll be using, the workflow I'll be using in my coding demo. I'm going to be using the Flutter gen-l10n command, and we use art files in Flutter to specify translations. And don't think too much about the details for now. Just think about, I want this talk to be more about the high level idea of like how you would localize a Flutter app, and also just like applications in general and things you want to think about. The repos and the links and everything will be on GitHub, and I'll try to post a link to the slides. So don't think too much about the nitty gritty details. But ARB is just basically like kind of a subset of JSON that basically defines your translations, and also like provides like descriptions and like metadata for those translations for your Flutter application. Yeah, I think that's it for this slide. Okay. And so now we're going to hopefully localize a simple Flutter application. So I'm going to start sharing my screen instead of this slide. All right. So this is my editor. And basically, this is a variation of the starter Flutter application that you have when you type Flutter create blah, 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 blah. And so, all this is let me see if I can run the app for you guys, just to get you guys to see what it is before we start. Maybe it's better if I share my screen. Give me a moment. Oops. I'm just going to share the whole screen. Cool. Also, if there are any questions about anything along the way, just post your questions, and there'll be a Q&A at the end, and I'll try my best to answer any question by the end of that time. Okay, cool. So yeah, this is just the application, right? It just a very, very simple app. It just has text that says you have push this button however many times. When you press the floating action button down here, basically it just increases the counter. So in this application, there are 3 places that I will need to localize. So the title itself, the text that basically says how many times the counter has been like incremented, and basically the tooltip for the floating action button. And what that is when you long press this floating action button, it shows a tooltip here. And for web and desktop applications, when you hover over it for a certain time, it'll show that tooltip as well. All right. So the first thing we'll need to do is I'm going to create an L10N folder. And in that L10N folder, I'm going to specify an ARB file. And I mentioned this before, right? This is basically where all our translations are going to live for our Flutter application. So it's basically like JSON specification. So let me think. I'm going to name the first thing I'm going to do is the title, right? So I'm going to say app bar title. So let me type this out now. I'll explain what this is. So basically what this is like it's a key value pair. And the key itself is just basically what the Dart getter is going to be called. Like, so your Flutter app, how you're going to like reference basically the localization you're trying to go for. And on the right side, the value is basically the string value that's going to appear on your application. So I specified the ARB file. Next thing I need to do is go into my pub spec. Set this to true. The details for all the steps I'm doing in pub spec, they're a little more like advanced, so don't think too much about these. But basically, it's just basically setting up your project so that it supports this localizations workflow. I think it's Flutter localizations, and then it's coming from the Flutter SDK. And I also need to import the INTL package. I just put any in there, but specify whatever version you might need for your application. Let's see. Oh wait, that's the debug console. Not bad. Okay, should be fine. Done right. Okay, not yet. Okay, let me rebuild my app real quick. Actually, let me run Flutter Gen L10. Okay, awesome. So if you go into your .dart tool folder, under Flutter Gen L10N, you'll see these files. And basically, these are the localizations files that will be needed to localize your application. One way to make this automatic is basically to generate these files, I had to run Flutter Gen L10N. But one way to make this automatically rerun whenever you run your application or do a hot reload is basically you just specify a file called l10n.yaml in your root Flutter project like this. And you don't have to specify anything in here right now. But basically what you would have to do in here eventually is put in your options, if you have any, for how you want to generate your localizations. That's all described in Flutter Gen L10N help. There are a list of options here, so don't worry too much about this. This is not very important for what we're doing right now. Okay. So now when I run my Flutter app, command. Like I said, it's gonna be a little rough because I didn't have time to practice. I built this morning, and I'm just hoping that nothing goes wrong as I go along. Let's see. Okay, let's see if there's anything anyone said. Okay, cool. Okay, great. The app is building. I haven't really introduced anything yet. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import actually Flutter Gen, and then it's Gen L10N, and then I'm going to import actually, I knew this was going to happen. Let me see. It's true. Get all the dependencies. Oh, there we go. Cool. And so if you look into here, basically there's a app localizations class, and basically all it does is just think of it as what you use to get all of the localizations that you'll be generating. So for example, in the English version in the English subclass, we have a string getter called @bar_title, and it just basically returns Flutter localizations demo. And pay attention to the Dart file and the ARB file. Basically, the ARB file specifies the definition of this generated Dart file. So notice that the getter itself is titled after the key, and then the value is basically following the value specified in the art file. Cool. And so what we're going to do is basically, first of all, we need to specify in the material app that we want to support a bunch of locales. So support locales, localizations delegate. So this is just the necessary setup that you need to do to get your Flutter app to support localization. You need to specify the list of support locales, and the list of localizations delegates, which are the localizations delegates is generated by the genLTNN command. And so basically where I'm getting these lists, these delegates and these support locales is in the generate class. There are two like helper static getters, and they just basically specify a list of localizations delegates that will be like, basically these are the default version values, and you can customize them however you want and just like manually like insert whatever you want in here. But this is one of the nice things about this, like basically you don't about the workflow, you don't have to specify it yourself, and you can just use the values use the default values provided. So here support locales only says English because we only have an English art file specified. So now in my app, if I go and grab the app bar title, oh yeah, this is a new null safety thing. So when I do a restart or a reload, it should just say exactly what it said before. And I'm going to test one thing real quick. Let me just add the word haha at the end of this. Hot reload. And hey, there's an update. So now it's grabbing basically it's getting the value from the ARM file rather than a string that's specified in your Flutter code. Awesome. Okay, so that's the first step. I'm going to specify one of those. Remember how I said in ltn.yaml, this is where you specify properties or like kind of like customizations for your workflow. I'm going to do something called nullable getter and set it to true. And what that does is basically I'm assuming that it's nullable. Let me see if that works as I expected it to. Like I said, this is a demo I hadn't practiced, so might be a little wonky. Okay, let them do it. So okay, anyway, let's just ignore that. So what this is supposed to do is make the getter non-nullable by default, but oh wait, I'm supposed to set it false. Maybe that's why. Ah, yeah, there we go. Yeah, basically, to make the code backwards compatible, it has to be nullable by default. But then I introduced a new parameter lately called nullable getter. And if you set it to false, it makes it non-nullable by default. And so it can make your code a little bit cleaner. So you have to add the exclamation point after every call to get app localizations. Awesome. Okay. So next two things I need to localize are this text here and the tooltip, or like get set up. I haven't localized it yet. So let's call this, I guess, counter description text. You have pushed this button this many times. So this is one of those situations I was talking about earlier, right? You want to interpolate a variable into here because what's happening is you can't translate the counter value itself. You need to grab it from your app state instead of, like hard coding it for your translator, because that's just impossible. So one of the extra things you need to do is you need to specify some metadata. Oops, sorry about that. How you do that is you just basically have another key value pair where it's prefixed with an @ and then basically the exact same name as the variable, the key of the value that you're trying to translate or localize. I don't know why the system UI keeps like not responding, so just ignore that for now. And this is also a good place to put in a description. So basically, what we use this in, at least in the Flutter gallery, is we use it to help describe to translators, provide some context for the translators as to what this translation is for. Like, remember how I mentioned with like highly specific applications, maybe it's like specific to like finance or economics or some kind of title or some kind of topic that you're translator might not be familiar with, this is the place to put it. So for example, I could say, the application has a counter for how many times a button is pressed. This describes the text. This is text describing that behavior. Something along those lines, right? I just came up with that on the spot, but you guys can probably come up with something better with more time. And so then this is the more important, not more important, but like one of the key pieces for interpolation. So basically you specify a key called placeholder. And here in my art file, I called it count. So then here I also need to specify that the placeholder's name is count. Oh, sorry, not counter. I leave it as an empty object, but sometimes you might have to specify some metadata, but in this case, we don't have to do anything. And so once I do a hard reload and I look into the file, notice that now there's a string getter called counter description text. Oh, it's not correct. So it's supposed to do interpolation, but then that means I did something wrong. Let me take a quick look. Placeholder, maybe? Yeah, there you go. So now it's not a getter anymore. It's a method that basically takes a count, and then it returns a string interpolating that count into your complete string. So then how I would use this in my application is I would basically say app localizations.of context, and then I would say locale name. Oh, not locale name. I forgot the name of the description text. And then I would insert the counter as an argument. And look, nothing has changed here. And just to verify that it did the right thing, I'm just going to add some like some garbage text at the beginning of the R file and just see if it modifies correctly. There we go. And then hard reload. There we go. Nice. All right, and then the last thing is the simple piece of the tooltip. So tooltip description, and then, oh wait, missing a comma. And I just say tooltip. Oh, sorry, it's supposed to say increment, not tooltip, my bad. Actually, let's leave it at tooltip just to see if it works. I haven't hard reloaded. There we go. Awesome. So it says tooltip, and then I'm going to modify it to increment instead. I should update. Awesome. Great. So this is the first step, right? Just basically getting your application set up to handle the workflow, specifying the English versions of everything, and then your app is basically set up for localization. The next step you have to do is basically start translating all the translations. So here, I'm going to specify app_ms.arb. Oh yeah, another important thing. So the R files have to be titled, you can call the beginning anything you want, and then underscore, and then the ISO 639 codes I was talking about before. So here it's English, and then here it's going to be Malay. And so what I'm going to do right now is just do a quick copy paste over. But then one of the things is you don't have to do the metadata for translations. You only have to do it for the template language. And in this case, it was the English version. So right now, if I set my app to Malay, it would still give the English localizations because I haven't like renamed everything. And lucky for me, I already translated everything ahead of time. And these are pulled out of Google Translate, and I kind of like manually handled it based on like the Malay I still remember. So if it's wrong, I'm sorry. But it'll still it'll like serve the purpose of the demo. So basically, I'm just replacing every key value pair for the Malay translation with the actual Malay translation. So this would probably be like what you would get from your translator, or if you're translating the app yourself, just like translating it yourself. Oh, this shouldn't be this, but it's okay. It says tooltip instead of increment, so apologize for that. Awesome. So once I do a hot reload, it seems like nothing has changed because the emulator I'm using is currently set to English. But if I set it to Malay, you should see that everything should update to Malay if there are no problems. And as everything with live coding goes, there's a problem. Let me see. Or maybe it's not MS. Let me do a quick Google search. Oops, sorry about that. I think it's MS. And did I? Oh, I did do MS. Okay, so this should work. I'm not exactly sure why it's not working, but let me take a look again. Okay, set Malay on top. Whoops. Refresh the application. Okay. One thing I've noticed is that the Malay localizations haven't been generated, so I had to like hand run it. I think it's a bug with the workflow, so I apologize for that. So now that the appropriate Dart file has been generated, let's do a hard restart and it should work properly. Great, now everything's in Malay. So notice here, I mentioned this before, right? Like this interpolates a variable. So the cool thing here is like basically you can just specify here, oh, I want the count to go into the sentence over here. And yeah, so this is basically a quick run through of localizing an application to Malay from English. And it's a very, very simple app. And you can imagine that with bigger apps, there's a lot more going on. So I don't need to demo all of that because the Flutter gallery itself actually has all of this set up. I'm going to show you really quickly on GitHub. I didn't plan to do this, but everything is freestyle right now. So yeah, if you look at the Flutter gallery, there's an L10N file, and it specifies the R file for every language that the gallery supports, right? I wonder if Malay supported it. Let's take a look. Yeah, it is. Great. Oh, no, it's not. Oh, yeah, some of it is. Some of it hasn't been translated yet, and some of it has been. So if you look here, like these are all the Malay translations for what you would see inside the gallery application. So yeah, like if you want to see another example of an app that's local, a Flutter app that's localized, the Flutter gallery is the place to go. And I think that's the end of my talk. Yeah, so I just wanted to end with that demo to show how you would localize a Flutter application. There's a lot of complexity, and we try to like hide that away from you guys. So I hope that was very helpful, and I'll take questions at the end after the end of all of this.